Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Shmuel Aleph. Last week, Michael Kraus gave the game away when we said that we were going to look at some scriptural comparisons of Naval to a certain person. And Michael immediately said, Lavan.
Me and my big mouth.
So I said, right, well, okay. Now that you've spoilt it for everyone, you're going to have to do all the hard work next week. And so here you are. So first off, I'll help you out a bit because I've read on. So
I've looked at Sion as well. There's an
excellent.
article on it.
Okay, let's start with the obvious comparison between Naval and Lavan, and that's the name itself. How do you spell Naval? Nun, vet, lamed, right? Is that right? Let's have a look on the screen. Let's put the screen on straight away. There we go. There you are. Okay, so Naval is spelt Nun, Vav, Lamed. There we go. There it is on the screen for you. How is Lavan spelt?
Reverse.
The reverse. Okay. So the first question I'm going to ask is, are there any other examples in the Torah where the name of somebody is backwards to the character trait of the person? I've got a feeling that David Marks might know the answer to this question because I think he's read the Pirush by Rav Bazak, who mentions it. I thought this was great. Anybody? It's hard. It's quite a hard one, this. But when you see them, there's two of them. When you see them, I think you'll say, "Oh yeah, why didn't I think of that?" Okay. So, David, do you want to tell us what they are? No? David's got a look of surprise on his face. Okay. I thought maybe you knew it because perhaps you'd read the Rav Bazak.
Yeah, I've forgotten it.
You've forgotten it. Okay, that's good. That's good because I can remind you. Okay, so the first one is over here in where is it now? There it is. It is the last pasuk of Parshat Bereshit. What happens at the end of Parshat Bereshit is that Hashem decides that he's going to destroy the world with a flood, and one person is not going to get destroyed, one person and his family. And who is that? Noah. And I have put on the screen for you, Jeffrey, to read out for us in blue.
But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord.
Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. What is the word for favor in Hebrew?
Chayin.
Chayin. Correct.
Yeah.
Chayin. And how do you spell Noah?
Nun chet.
Nun chet. And how do you spell Chayin?
Chet nun.
Chet nun. There you are. So Noah is Chayin backwards. So there you have an example of Naval is Lavan backwards. Okay, we have a precedent here right at the beginning of the Torah, the end of Parshat Bereshit, the last pasuk. V'Noach matza chen be'enei Hashem, and Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. You can see it very clearly here. it's not quite so obvious because, of course, the nun in Chen is a final nun, but it's still a nun. Noach and Chen are back to front. Naval and Lavan are back to front. There's one other example in the Torah where the name of the person is his character trait backwards. Anybody know this one? If you get this one without having looked it up, I'll be very, very impressed indeed. Give you a clue. It's in Parshat Vayeshev. Okay, here it comes. This is the story of Yehuda and his children. Yehuda's first two children were called and Onan. Okay, and Onan. Was the firstborn. And what are we told? Verse 7, Jeffrey.
Now Judah's firstborn, was evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death.
Okay, and we're not told exactly what he did. We're told what Onan did afterwards, but we're not told what did to be evil. But look at this. Vayehi b'chor Yehuda ra b'einei Hashem. How do you spell in Hebrew?
Ayin Resh.
Ayin Resh. How do you spell ra, evil?
Resh Ayin.
Resh Ayin. Resh Ayin. There you go. There's on the screen in blue. Can you see that? Ayin Resh. And he was Ra, which means evil. Resh Ayin. Back the opposite way around. So there you have two examples in Sefer Bereshit of the name of a person implying their characteristic traits. Noach had Chen and was Ra. Naval was Lavan. He had the same character traits as Lavan. Let's go back to our chapter here, chapter 25. Naval and Lavan, same word, same letters, back to front. So the first thing is the clue that we get from the name. Naval and Lavan are the mirror image of one another. What was the particular character trait of Lavan? You're muted, Michael.
Deceitful.
He was deceitful.
He was a crook. He was a crook.
He was a crook. He was deceitful. And what specifically did he do, or in fact not do properly?
He was a cattle rustler. He was a cattle rustler.
Who was a cattle rustler?
Lavan.
Okay, but what specifically did he not do for Yaakov that he should have done?
He didn't pay him properly.
He didn't pay him properly, correct. He didn't pay him properly. He swindled him. He changed his wages 10 times at least. So Lavan did not pay Yaakov properly. Naval did not pay David properly. What goes on? We had the story earlier on. David looks after Naval's men and his sheep, and then eventually he goes off to collect his recompense. I won't say his wages because it wasn't an official deal. But Naval sends his men packing with nothing. So the character trait there is very similar. And there are a few other comparisons of Naval and Lavan, and I'm going to show you them now. They are linguistic comparisons that the author of Sefer Shmuel is giving us hints about the comparison between Naval and Lavan. The first one I want to show you is verse 16 in our chapter. Jeffrey, verse 16, please.
They were in brackets, protective wall over us, both by night and by day. All the days we were with them, tending the sheep.
Stop there. So what were David's men doing? They were looking after the sheep of Naval. They were looking after the sheep of somebody else in a protective way.
Yeah.
Who also did that?
I mean,
Who also did that? Yaakov did that for Lavan. So there you have a first connection, is that they were both looking after somebody else's sheep. But there's more to that in this particular pasuk, because if you have a look at that pasuk, Jeffrey's just disappeared for the moment, so I'll just say it again. They were a wall over us both night and day. Have a look in Parashat Vayetze, chapter 31 of Bereshit. I've put it in blue for you on the screen. Hayiti bayom achalanu chorev v'kerach balayla v'tidash nati me'enai. I was in the field by day when the heat consumed me, and the frost at night. My sleep wandered from my eyes. This is Yaakov speaking to Lavan. Yaakov says that he looked after the sheep night and day. Exactly the same as we've said here, night and day. So the language here in verse 16 is hinting to us the story of Yaakov and Lavan. Similarly, in our pasuk 7, Jeffrey, verse 7 of our chapter.
He said to his men, it would be sacrilegious before Hashem for me to do this thing to my Lord, the anointed of Hashem, to send forth my hand against him.
I think you're in the wrong chapter, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Am I?
We're in chapter
7.
25.
Okay. Sorry. And now I have heard that they are shearing for you. Now your shepherds stayed with us. We did not shame them. And they did not lack anything all the days they were in Carmel.
Okay, stop there. So they were not lacking anything. Lo nifkad lahem mu'uma is the Hebrew word mu'uma. What does that mean, mu'uma?
Anything. The slightest thing.
Yeah, it does. And it means that there was nothing missing at all. Nothing missing at all. Let's have a look at the Yaakov and Lavan story in verse 38, Jeffrey, on the screen.
Already 20 years have I been with you, and your ewes and she-goats have not aborted, neither have I eaten the rams of your flocks. I have not brought home to you anything torn by other animals. I would suffer its loss. From my hand you would demand it. What was stolen by day and what was stolen at night.
Okay, so there you have it. Yaakov says to Lavan, you have not suffered any loss at my hand, neither night or day. The exact idea that David says, you were not missing anything the whole time, and in the night and the day. So the language is very, very similar, and the author of Shmuel Aleph is showing us the connection between the Yaakov Lavan story and the David and Naval story. We mentioned just a minute ago that the wages which were his salary was deprived of him. In our chapter here, verse 21. Jeffrey, verse 21.
And now David had said, It was for naught that I guarded all of this man's possessions in the desert, and there was not missing anything from all that belonged to him. Yet he has repaid my kindness with evil.
So surely in vain, if you have watched this, his looked after all his property in vain, what does that mean? It means he hasn't been paid for it. He hasn't been paid properly for it.
Johnny, can I ask you a question? I see that the text in English here that I have is different from what Jeff's reading slightly. So what am I actually looking at?
You are looking at the Chabad translation. And Jeffrey is reading the Art Scroll translation.
Is it not possible to have the Art Scroll translation on the screen?
No, we do that for a reason, because often we see different ideas coming out of the different translations.
Okay,
so we get the benefit of both.
Okay, thanks.
So there, Jeffrey's just read out that it's surely in vain I've watched all this fellow's possessions. So if you did it in vain, you didn't get paid properly for it. If we whiz back to the Yaakov story in verse 41, Jeffrey's just read the verses 38 and 39. How about 41, Jeffrey, on the screen?
This is 20 years that I have spent in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your animals, and you changed my wages 10 times.
Meaning, he's changed his wages 10 times, means he's not been paid properly. So there's another connection. Another one is, when did all of this happen in our story? When was this going on? This whole business with Naval? Well, it was going on verse 4 in our chapter, Jeffrey. Verse 4, please.
David heard in the wilderness that Naval was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 attendants, and David said to the attendants, "Go up to Carmel and approach Naval, inquiring after his welfare in my name, and say,
Okay, that'll do. That'll do for the moment. That'll do. It happened, this whole story happened when Naval was shearing his sheep. What about the Lavan and Yaakov story? Have a look and read for us, Jeffrey, verse 19 and 20 on the screen.
Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and meanwhile Rachel stole her father's teraphim, and Yaakov concealed from Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was fleeing.
Okay, so the Yaakov and Lavan story took place at the time of the sheep shearing, same as our story. Now, finally, the last one I want to show you is that when does Hashem get involved in this whole story? Let's have a look, first of all, at the Lavan story. Verse 22.
On the 3rd day, Laban was informed that Jacob had fled.
Keep going.
So he took his kinsman with him, and he pursued him 7 days' journey, and he overtook him at Mount Gilead.
Stop there. So on how long after this event did Lavan catch up with Yaakov and have this conversation?
10 days.
10 days.
10 days. Correct. Correct. 10 days. What about our story? Have a guess.
10 days.
Good guess. There you go. Verse 38, Jeffrey, in our chapter.
It happened after 10 days that Hashem struck Naval and he died.
Yeah. Naval had a stroke after 10 days. So you can see all of those comparisons that Naval and Lavan, it's the same story. Now, if Naval is Lavan, then who is Yaakov in this story?
David.
David is being compared to Yaakov, right? David is Yaakov and Naval is Lavan. That's the comparison we're seeing at the moment. Now we're going to see something else in a minute, which is going to turn that on its head. But just before we do that, I want to ask you a question. Is it fair to compare Naval to Lavan? Yaakov worked for Lavan. It was a proper arrangement with a set amount of fee, because we know that because his wages were changed 10 times, so he must have had a contract which he kept changing. And Lavan did not pay him. What
He
about
could have got a
Naval?
rise. He could have got a rise every 2 years.
You can
Yeah.
compare them, because if you take their names, Lavan and Naval, Naval is Lavan back to front.
I think you must have missed the first part of the shiur, Philip.
Yeah, I did. The first few minutes I missed.
We
Well,
spoke about
that. You said that.
and I also showed. I'll just show it for your benefit. I just showed 2 examples as well. Have a look at this. Vayom, where are we? Where is it? Here we go. V'Noach matza chen b'nei Hashem. Noach and chen are back to front. And also Er and Er.
And Ra.
Ra.
And Ra.
So
Yeah. Sorry, I missed it.
You missed that. So, so is it fair to compare Lavan to Naval? Naval never asked David to do anything. Lavan employed Yaakov with a proper contract. John is right; he didn't treat him well, and he didn't pay him as he should have paid him, and he kept changing the terms of his contract, and that's a bad thing to do. But what about Naval? David took it upon himself to do this job. Naval never asked him to do it, and so, as we've said a few times before, there was no legal obligation on Naval to pay David. So why is the scripture, why is the author of Shmuel Aleph so keen to point out that Naval and Lavan are the same person? It doesn't seem fair. Naval hasn't done anything wrong, really. He never asked David to do it, and he's not obliged. Yes, Jeffrey? I
think it's to emphasize the difference between husband and wife, where the wife wanted to do the correct thing, the proper thing, knowing that her husband had done the wrong one.
Okay, so that's
one
second, Hannah, one second. I think that's fair. It is definitely a contrast. Abigail is definitely the heroine here, and so what you're saying, Jeffrey, is we're painting Naval as the supervillain in contrast to Abigail, who is the superhero.
Well, at the moment, I've not seen evidence of his supervillain. I've heard that he's not a nice guy, and he's a bit of a miser. He's not very generous. But I've not heard that he's a supervillain, but his wife knows better.
Okay, so that's good. So what you're saying is you agree with my question, which is it's not fair to cast him as a Lavan. Lavan was a proper villain. We haven't seen any evidence that Naval is a villain. You're right, Abigail calls him a villain, and he doesn't behave nicely. He behaves crassly to David's men. So in some ways, Jeffrey, you're not really answering the question. What you're saying is you're validating the question. So anybody got an answer? Hannah, did you want to give an answer?
Yeah, I want to say we don't know that it wasn't common practice at the time to ask protection from somebody who's stronger, and that may have been. You don't know that the people that worked for Naval didn't ask David, to sort of keep an eye out for them.
Okay.
We have no information about that. And
okay, that's fair comment.
What would lead us to think that possibly yes, is that Naval's wife, seems to think that there's a really legitimate claim there, and she goes to David and she's very apologetic, and she's, realizes that Naval's done the wrong thing. So
I think you're absolutely right about that. It turns out that Rav Steinsaltz, I think, mentions in his commentary that this was in fact a common practice that men did. It was an unwritten rule in the desert that you looked after everybody else's situation.
Yeah.
And it was also an unwritten rule that you were entitled to be recompensed for doing so. So you're right, Hannah, we're not told that, but it seems that was the way it was. And therefore, Naval, and this is the point I wanted to make, so you bring out the point very nicely, and therefore Naval, although not legally required to pay David, he was morally obligated to do so. He can't turn around and say, I never asked for this. You did it off your own bat. I'm giving you nothing. Because
liable by custom.
It was local custom, and it was
liable by custom then.
It was liable by custom. Yeah, perhaps not in legal terms. He wouldn't have been. Yes, David, I'm coming to you in a sec. He would not, and this is the point. This is it's a really important point. Naval would not have been obliged in a court of law to pay David because he didn't employ him. But in the court of moral obligation, then he was obliged to pay. And what I think that the Tanakh is telling us here is that a person like Naval, who is Naval Birshut Torah in the words of the Ramban, he is a disgusting person, but did not break a Torah rule because there was no contract. But he's still a disgusting person. And that Naval Birshut Torah, that failure to fulfill your moral obligation is exactly the same as somebody who does not fill his legal obligation. And that is why I think that the Tanakh is at pains to give us all of these clues that Naval is being compared to Lavan. Because what the Torah wants to tell us, what the Tanakh wants to tell us, is that to have proper morals and to fulfill your moral obligation to somebody or something is just as important to fulfill your legal obligation. And we see it because Naval gets his comeuppance. We read it. He got a stroke after 10 days. He got a stroke and then he died. Now, that was not done by David. David wanted to go and slaughter everybody, but Abigail called him off. It was done by God. And this whole story is the moral of this story is that the moral obligation is just as strong excuse me, as the legal obligation. And I think that it's very clear that Naval being compared to Lavan tells us very clearly that what the Tanakh thinks about the level of obligation to somebody morally as well as legally. Yes, David, you wanted to add something. 1 second, Johnny. David wanted to say something first.
Yeah, you could also interpret it another way, that David's running a mafia-style protection racket. Have you ever been to a football match at Anfield or Goodison Park and approached by these 8-year-old kids looking to mind your car for you?
Yes, the main road.
Yes,
main road.
The answer to your question is no, but I have been to Main Road in the old days. Main Road, of course, it used to be in a very residential area. It was always like plonked in the middle of a whole bunch of terraced houses, and absolutely,
and a very violent area as well, full of gangsters, drugs, guns.
Yeah. Moss Side, not particularly a nice area. Yeah.
Can I mind your car, mister? Can I mind your car, mister?
In my day, it was 2 bob. It was probably less in your day, Johnny. Maybe a shilling, but it was 2 bob in my day to mind your car. And if you didn't give them the 2 bob, you came back to your tires slashed or your car scratched or the window broken or something. Yeah. So fair point, David. And I think that.
But then you ask, on the other hand, if that's the case, why did God kill him?
Yeah, and I think the answer is what Hannah said, and that is that it seems from reading between the lines and in the Meforshim that this was an accepted practice, and it wasn't something which was a mafia thing. Although, as we will see very shortly, Tanakh is not entirely happy with David's behavior, but I don't think it's critical of his original behavior, which was looking after the sheep of Naval, because that seems to be what people did. And David was doing a good thing there. He was looking after Naval's sheep. I don't think it was a Liverpool, Goodison Park, Anfield, Main Road protection racket. Although if you were being unkind, you could certainly look at that in that way. Johnny, what did you want to add?
I think just a coincidence that his parents called him Naval. I never thought, well, let's call him Naval back to the front, should we?
Well, I think this is another example of this not being his real name. This was his nom de guerre. We've had it many times, haven't we, where we've seen names that you just would not call your children. Who can think of some names that you would just not call your children? Naval is disgusting. You wouldn't call your kid Shmuel Yisrael. Disgusting. No, you're not going to do that. Any other examples? Who can think of other examples in the Torah?
Sons. Yehuda's sons.
Yehuda's sons, Er and Onan. Er is Ra backwards, as we've seen. You're not going to do that. Yeah. There's another really obvious one in Sefer Bereshit as well. I'll give you a clue. Something to do with Dinah. Go on, David. David's got it.
Shem.
Called his son.
Shem.
Yeah. Well, what was Shechem's son called?
Chamor.
Chamor. And what is Chamor?
An ass.
Donkey. An ass.
Or a donkey.
Yeah.
Yisrael, donkey. No, a shtick Chamor. No, I don't think so. So the Tanakh is full of times where names are used to describe the person's personality, and they get these things afterwards. One of the ones we've mentioned on 1 second, Philip. First of all, 1 second, Philip, and you're muted. 1 second. One of the favorite ones of mine, I've mentioned it a few times, is in Megillat Ruth. The children of Elimelech, the two sons of Elimelech, are called Machlon and Chilion. Machlon and Chilion, disease and disaster. There are these two sons called disease and disaster. I don't think so. So the Tanakh uses names, not necessarily, they were not necessarily the names that they were given when they were born. So I think Naval may not have been his original name. Yes, Philip, you'll need to unmute because we can't hear you.
You say Chamor is in Hebrew, it means donkey, but they spoke another language. It's the same thing as what we call today Hamas. Hamas, in their eyes, it's a great name, and in our in Hebrew, Hamas is, I think, evil also, if I'm not mistaken.
Violence.
Yeah. So you see that if it's in a different language, the name has a different meaning, and that's why they call it.
But your theory falls down when you look at somebody like Avimelech. He didn't speak Hebrew either, but he's got a Hebrew name. So the names are converted. So I think that we can learn from the names whether they were the names given to them at birth. I very much doubt, and I don't think Naval was called Naval either. Right, let's have a look now.
So Johnny, On that specific one, with Naval specifically, again, look back at verse 25.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jeffrey,
Naval ki chishmo kenhu v'Naval shmo unevala imo.
So what do you want to say? You want to say he was his name?
This is the one place in Tanakh where the author of Shmuel, or the author of whichever sefer, says this is why he was called Naval. It's specific to Naval.
I'm going to show you something else in a minute, which I think may contradict what I've just said. I'm not sure. Let's have a look. What David is saying, have a look at verse 25, Jeffrey, in our chapter, please.
Let my Lord not set his heart against this base man, against Naval, for he is as his name implies. Naval is his name, and revulsion is his trait. And
Okay,
I, your maid servant, did not see my Lord's attendants whom you sent.
So this is his wife. And it may be, by the way, it may be Abigail who gave him the name Naval. It may be that, she had to live with the beast. So it may well be that, he was called something else by his parents. But when he got married to Abigail, she used that as his nickname. That is certainly very, very possible in my view. Okay, so Naval is compared to Lavan, and therefore, if Naval is compared to Lavan, David must be compared to Yaakov, because that's the parallel story. Yaakov and Lavan, David and Naval. But I'm going to show you now that the author of Shmuel Aleph is not overly impressed with David's behavior here. And he compares David to somebody else, not to Yaakov. And let's have a look at it. Why, first of all, let's just ask ourselves the question, what is it that Tanakh is not happy with in the behavior of David? What did David do that Tanakh is not happy with? Anyone?
He just wanted to slaughter Naval and his whole family.
Yeah, he was very rash. He was hot-headed. He had a big temper. We spoke yesterday in the Pirkei Avot Shir. I think Philip was the only one of you that was there. We spoke yesterday, didn't we, Philip, about the idea of trying to control one's temper and not flying off the handle. So this is he says in verse 13, Jeffrey, of our chapter, verse 13.
David said to his men, each man gird his sword. Each man girded his sword, and David too girded his sword. About 400 men went after David, and 200 others stayed with the belongings.
Okay, stop there. And then,
can I just say something, Johnny? Can I just say something?
Yes.
No, these figures, 400 and 200, are what would today be a modern infantry battalion. What's called the Gdud in Hebrew. That's about 600 men.
Okay, we're coming back to the numbers there in a minute. So he says immediately, the first thing he says, without any kind of thought about it, they come back, they told him what happened, and he said, right, gird your swords, that's it, we're going out to battle. And what does he say? Look at this, verse 22. No, verse 21 and 22.
Now David had said, it was for naught that I guarded all of this man's possessions in the desert, and there was not missing anything from all that belonged to him. Yet he has repaid my kindness with evil. Such shall God do to David's enemies, and such shall he do further. If I leave over until morning, all of that belongs to him, so much as a dog.
Okay, so what does verse 22 mean? What is that? What does it mean, verse 22?
It's a curse, and he's talking about himself in the third person already, which is a sign of kingship.
All right, it's a curse. That's the point that I wanted to bring out. He's swearing by God's name, as it were. What he's saying is, let's look at the pasuk backwards. He's saying, if I will not leave over even one dog from what he's got. I am going to destroy everything he's got, right up to the last dog. And the first part of the pasuk is, so help me God. It's swearing in God's name. He's making an oath that he is going to destroy everything of Naval. Now, we do know that Naval was not a very nice person. We also know that David did something good for Naval, and Naval did not repay him for it. But do you think, if I can use a contemporary word, that David's punishment of Naval for not paying him for looking after his sheep is proportionate to the crime? I think not. Do you think? Who's not? Can everybody mute, please? I'm getting a lot of feedback here.
Is it possible? Is it possible again that we're hitting a custom? Because later you find that Ziklag is completely demolished, and people tend to go for the whole hog. You don't just kill somebody; you wipe out everybody.
You're right. I think in one respect, in that was the way it was done in those days. Look at what happened in Shechem with Shimon and Levi. They went in and killed everybody, and that's happened in Yericho. It happened in the conquest of the land. You're right, but this is a specific issue, and that is that he never got given any bread and provisions for looking after somebody's sheep. That's not a capital offense. If you're going in to destroy, if you're going in to invade a country, you're right, back in those days, you destroyed everything. You took the women and children as slaves, and you destroyed everything that was there. That's how it was done. Agreed. But that's not what David is doing here.
This is what they're trying to do with Hamas today.
Well, that's for a reason. Absolutely.
Yes,
but it's not because he didn't give us provisions because we looked after their animals. Okay. The point that I'm making is that David,
they lulled us into thinking that we were safe.
Well, then they attacked us.
Yeah.
Right? Naval never attacked David. So why is David going to threaten to kill everything and destroy everything that he owns? It's over the top. It's not an appropriate reaction from David, and it's also not consistent with David's previous personality in the previous chapter. What did we see in the previous chapter? He actually had somebody who was trying to kill him. Not just didn't pay him for something, owed him money, was trying to kill him. And what did he do?
Cut off the corner of his coat and let him go.
He let him go. Didn't do anything to him. He showed mercy. He showed mercy. He showed an appropriate level.
But there, he says, I won't harm God's chosen. So he does it because Shaul is God's chosen.
Okay, all right, fair enough. But he still doesn't do it. He had every right to do that al pi halacha. Even though Shaul was the king, he was a rodef, and he was somebody who was going to kill him. The halacha is that you kill the opposition first. So he had every right, al pi halacha, to kill Shaul, and he didn't do so. Here, he's got no right to kill Naval, and yet he's threatening to do so. And we know that he was wrong because he himself admits that he's wrong. When Abigail comes and stops him from doing it, he says, thank God for Abigail. She stopped me doing a big sin. Yes, Jeffrey.
Maybe that's what made him a great man. To realize he could make a mistake.
Okay. Very good. We'll come to that later. But first, let's look at what he did wrong. And Tanakh is now going to compare him not to Yaakov, but to somebody else. Who do you think that David is going to be compared to now by Tanakh? We've already had one little clue.
Yehuda.
No, not Yehuda.
Reuben.
The 400 men that Philip mentioned is a clue. Who came with 400 men to try, or at least with an idea to destroy his enemy? Esav. Beginning of Parshat Vayishlach, he came with, there it is on the screen, I think. There we go. Verse 1 on the screen, Jeffrey.
Jacob lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children with Leah and with Rachel and with the 2 maidservants.
So Esau came with 400 men. David comes with 400 men. That's a very clear parallel that the Tanakh is painting for us. There is another parallel that we see with Esau and David HaMelech, and it is relevant to this that we have just spoken about, i.e. the flying off the handle, the temper of David. David's temperament was fiery. What did David and Esau have in common?
Red hair?
Yes, red hair. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at the beginning of Parshat Toldot on the screen, Jeffrey, please.
And the first one emerged ruddy. He was completely like the coat of hair, and they named him Esau.
And he was ruddy. He was admoni, from the word Adom. Can you see that word there? Admoni. Adom, red. That is the first time we come across Esau. When he's born, we're told that he's red. What about David? How is he described when we first meet David? Have a guess.
I think he was also admoni.
There we go. It's on the screen, verse 12, Jeffrey.
And he sent and brought him, and he was ruddy, with beautiful eyes and handsome appearance. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he.
This is when we first meet David, not actually when we first meet David before with Goliath. This is when Shmuel is told to go to Yishai and to anoint one of his sons. And he goes through all 7 sons and don't find one that's decent. And he says, have you not got another one? And he says, yeah, we've got the little shmerel in the field there, the little schnip, the runt of the herd. And so they bring him, and this is what the Torah tells us. He was admoni, same word as we have with Esau. There's Esau's admoni, and there is David's admoni. So David is compared to Esau in this respect. Redheads tend to have what?
Fiery.
Gingies have got a temper on them. Okay. As it so happens, my Gingy does not have a temper on him. My half Gingy does. I've got a half Gingy son who can have a little bit of a temper on him, but as it so happens, my fully Ginger one does not, interestingly. But generally speaking, we talk about Gingers being hot-headed and fiery. And so here we have in our chapter this idea, David coming with 400 men is being compared to Esau. And let's have a look if we've got any other comparisons. Well, there are some other linguistic comparisons that we have. Have a look in the story of Esau and Yaakov. It's in chapter 32 of Bereshit. Let me find it.
They both think they've been done out of something that was their due.
Oh, that's very good. Very good, Hannah. They both think that they've been done out of something which was their due. David thinks he's been done out of his wages for looking after the sheep. And Esau thinks he's been done out of
His birthright.
the birthright, the bracha. Correct. Have a look at Bereshit chapter 32. I'm just going to go back to that. Verse 17 on the screen, Jeffrey.
And he gave into the hands of his servants each herd individually, and he said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and make a space between one herd and another herd.
Stop there. Stop there. So Yaakov tells his servants to go on ahead of him, and he then comes behind, right? So he sends the gift first, and then he comes, right? Remember that story? Yeah, he gave into the hands of his servants each herd. What's the herd? This is the present going to Esau. And he goes on, and then he comes behind. Let's have a look at our chapter in verse 19, Jeffrey.
She said to attendants, go on ahead of me. Behold, I am coming behind you. But she did not tell Naval, her husband.
Stop there. Who came behind the gift? Remember, Abigail has sent these 200 loaves, verse 18, the 200 loaves and the jugs of wine and the sheep and all that stuff. Who comes after her, after the present? Abigail. So in this comparison, Abigail is Yaakov. And who is she going to? She's going to David. Who is Yaakov going to? Esau. David is compared to Esau in this particular part of the story. Abigail is compared to Yaakov. Another comparison is that in the Yaakov Esau story, we see a great deal of play in the language used of my servant. Have a look on the screen, verse 18 onwards, 18 to 21.
And he commanded the first one, saying, when my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, to whom do you belong? And where are you going? And for whom are these before you? You shall say, in brackets, I belong to your servant Jacob. Yaakov, it's a gift sent to my master, to Esau, and behold, he himself is behind us.
Stop there. Yaakov describes himself as the servant and Esau as the master. Have a look at verse 21 on the screen.
And you shall say also, behold, your servant Yaakov is behind us. For he said, I will appease his anger with the gift that is going before me. And afterwards I will see his face. Perhaps he will favor me.
Again, the servant-master relationship. Let's have a look at what. Let's have a look at the use of the language for Abigail in our chapter, verse 24 and 25. Jeffrey.
She fell at his
23,
feet
actually,
said,
23.
Okay. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from the donkey and fell on her face before David and prostrated herself to the ground.
Stop there. So that's an act of a servant and a master. She prostrates herself before her master. Carry on, 24.
She fell at his feet and said, with me myself, my Lord, lies the sin. Let your maidservant, my Lord, not set his heart against this base man, against Naval, for he is his name implies. Naval is his name, and revulsion is his trade. And I, your maidservant, did not see my lord's attendants whom you sent.
There you go. It's the same lashon, only in the feminine. She's describing herself as a maidservant the whole time and describing David as the master, in the same way that Yaakov described himself as a servant and Esav as the master. So the lashon here, the language of Tanakh, is very clearly comparing David. In the first part, he's comparing David to Yaakov because Naval is Lavan. But in the second relationship, that between David and Abigail, Abigail is Yaakov and David is Esav. And this one is the clincher. I'm going to show you one more, which is a clincher. What is the Hebrew word for a gift or a present?
Matana.
Okay, correct. What other word in Hebrew is used in Tanakh as a gift or a present?
A different word.
A different word, yeah.
Shy.
That is used, yes. Another one? On the screen for you, this is the Yaakov and Esav story, verse 10.
Mincha.
Mincha, correct. Mincha. Go on, Jeffrey, verse 10.
Thereupon Yaakov said, please not, if indeed I have found favor in your eyes, then you shall take my gift from my hand, because I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of an angel, and you have accepted me.
Okay, so the word mincha is also a word for a gift. And
peace
there
offering. Isn't it a peace offering?
More than well, it is here a peace offering. It doesn't have to be a peace offering, but it is here. Now, there is another word that the Torah uses for a gift. It only uses it in one place in the Torah and one place in Tanakh. What is that word for a gift? Have a look at the next pasuk, verse 11, Jeffrey.
Now take my gift which has been brought to you, for God has favored me with it in brackets. And in brackets, because I have everything, he prevailed upon him, and he took, in brackets, it.
Okay, so the word for gift here is bracha. Kach na et birchati. Take my bracha. It's the only place in the Torah where the word bracha means a gift from one person to another. Have a look at our chapter, verse 27, Jeffrey.
And now this homage that your maidservant has brought to my Lord, let it be given to the attendants who are traveling with my Lord.
There you go. And in Hebrew, ve'ata, and now, habracha hazot, this gift. So there you have it. The only two places in Tanakh where bracha means a gift from one person to another. And there you have the comparison, very clear comparison between David and Esav. This chapter of Tanakh is telling us one major thing, and that is the complexity of David's character. On the one hand, David is Yaakov to Naval's Lavan. He looks after the guy's stuff, and he behaves in a Yaakov-like way. And then when he loses his temper, he acts in an Esav-like way. And that's what the author of this chapter is telling us, that David, who in the last chapter did not kill his enemy, somebody who was seeking to kill him, Shaul, he let him go. And in this chapter, allows his temper to get the better of him and threatens to wipe out Naval for a much, much lower crime. he is at the same time, he is Yaakov and Esav. And this is the complexity of David HaMelech throughout his whole life. On the one hand, he is the great David HaMelech who was brave and went to battle with Goliath and went to battle with the Plishtim. On the other hand, David is a flawed character. We'll see with the story of Bathsheba. We see that he's got a temper, and yet he is the great David HaMelech. So what this whole story is telling us is that we don't have in our heroes, we don't have saints, we don't have whitewashes, and that's why, as you know, one of my pet hates is the whitewash that various commentaries seek to do of our heroes and our biblical characters, because we learn from the fact that nobody is perfect, that even great people can fall. But the secret, of course, that what made David HaMelech such a great person, and you don't see this very often in leaders, and that is that they are willing to say, I was wrong. Abigail comes along and says, don't do this. It's not becoming of you. And he says, you're right. Abigail, thank you very much. You stopped me from doing a big sin. He sins with Bathsheba. Natan comes along and says to him, that was a bad thing that you did. And he says immediately, you're right, Chatati, I sinned. And this is a character that one sec, Philip, this is a character that we can look at and say, David HaMelech is one of the greatest heroes in our history. He was the one that united the kingdom more than anybody else. By the time Shlomo came along, it was beginning to fall apart. And by the end of Shlomo's reign, it had all fallen apart. David was the great uniter. David was the great person who everybody appreciated. And perhaps, I want to say, you can disagree with me if you like, but I want to say that the main characteristic of David that made people think of him as the great David was his vulnerability, his human nature, and the fact that he was willing to accept when he'd done wrong. Now, if some of our leaders today were willing to accept when they'd done wrong, we might not be in the biggest mess that we're in at the moment. That's just my little take on this. I think it's a fascinating chapter, this, because it shows you the complexity of David HaMelech. Yes, Philip?
There's a question, because yesterday in the Parsha, we saw the contrary, that Yosef forgave his brothers for the mistake that they'd made.
But only
it's the contrary of what happened.
No, it's not. It's exactly the same thing. If you look carefully in the parasha yesterday, there's one word there that gives us the secret. Let me see if I can find it and put it on the screen for you. 1 sec. I'll just find the pasuk. I'll talk to you. I'm looking down, but I'm talking to you while I'm looking for the pasuk. Yeah. We see that Yosef does not forgive them until he puts them through the test to see whether they have done tshuva. And he comes along and he says all this whole performance with Binyamin and bringing him back to the thing and imprisoning him, and then right at the beginning of the parasha, he sees that Yehuda is willing to sacrifice his life for Binyamin, right? And he sees that they see that they do. He does tshuva, right? And only then when he sees that, it's chapter 45. Let me just find it for you now. Chapter 45. There it is. And only then he says, "V'lo yachol Yosef litapek."
Not on the screen, Julie.
Oh, I haven't shared the screen. Thank you. I'll show it you now. Sorry. Only when he's put them through it and he's seen that they've done teshuvah, then he says, "Lo yachol Yosef litapek." Joseph couldn't bear it any longer, and he cries and he says, "Vayomei Yosef elechav ani Yosef." I am Yosef. Okay, and now this is the important word. Verse 5. Ve'ata, and now, al teyatzvu, do not be sad. Al yichar be'einechem, do not let it trouble you. Ki machartem oti heina, that you sold me here. Ki lemichya shlachani Elohim lifnechem. Because
Yeah, but
God
what I'm
sent me here.
asking.
Wait, let me finish.
Sorry.
Because God sent me here. But he says a word here that you haven't even taken any notice of, because nobody does. And this word here, ve'ata, with an ayin, and now, only now are you not allowed to be sad, because now you've done tshuva. Until then, until you've done tshuva, you sold me here, and it was wrong. But now that you've done tshuva, that's wiped away, and it's become clear that God sent me, not you.
So they did admit that they'd done wrong.
They absolutely did, and that's why Yosef was able to forgive them, because they'd done tshuva. Had they not done tshuva, then this would not have happened.
So it's actually comparable to what to the shiur of today. Yeah.
Correct. It's the opposite of what you said, actually.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was mistaken.
It's the same idea. The greatness of the Shvatim here was that they did tshuva, and that story of yesterday's parsha and what we've learned today tells us again of the complexity of people's characters and the greatness of somebody, particularly somebody in a position of power, who is able to say, "I did wrong."
Yeah,
and that was wrong. Okay, any questions, any comments on that really fascinating story from Tanakh today? Yes, David, you're muted.
Yeah, just something I'm sure you read from Rav Bazak as well, which is brilliant. He quotes the Midrash when we're talking about both David HaMelech and Esav being red-headed, possibly rednecks. He quotes this Midrash that says that when Shmuel first comes to see David and notices he's red, he says to Hashem, God forbid this one's going to turn out like Esav, another redhead. And the response from Hashem is that Esav will be a murderer on his own volition, whereas when David HaMelech becomes king, the murders that he'll perform will be with the authority of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, I did see that interesting midrash, and the quotes here. He says that Esav is described as red. David is described as red im yefei einayim, with beautiful eyes. And again, it's amazing how often this happens. But yesterday, in the Pirkei Avot Shir, as well as talking about temper, we were also talking about an ayin tova, a good eye. And somebody who's got a good eye means that you look well upon people. It looks well. You look for the good in people, not in the bad. So you're right. The midrash that quotes this. The fact that, yes, he is got a temper, but ultimately he's got yefei einayim. Ultimately, David is a good guy. He's got good eyes, and he looks at people in the right way. Sometimes he needs a bit of help, like Avigail. But what did he do with Avigail? He didn't send her packing and say, chutzpah, you come here talking to me like that. He says, you're right. And who else did that? Who said, you're right to a woman? David's ancestor, Yehuda, said about Tamar, Tzadka mimeni. She was right and I was wrong. There's another example, Yehuda, another leader who was able to say, I was wrong. It's very clear, if you look at it carefully, that what the Torah and Tanakh are telling us is that to be a good leader, to be a great leader, you have to have humility. You have to know when it's appropriate to say, I was wrong, and I have to change the way I behave. I'll just end with two favorite words of mine, Hamavin Yovin.
and going
about
back
Ayin Hara as well, don't we? Ayin Hara.
Yeah, Ayin Hara is the opposite of Ayin Tov. Ayin Tovah, yeah.
Johnny, what you said just now about Yehuda doing teshuva at the beginning of yesterday's parsha, again, the key word and the whole reason for having the story of Yehuda and Tamar where it occurs. What is the key word is Eravon, the deposit that she's holding for him. And what has Yehuda done with Benjamin? Ki Arav et Hana'a.
Yeah.
Okay, he's putting his life at stake for Binyamin.
Yeah, guaranteed.
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
this is what he'd learnt from how he'd done wrong by Tamar.
Excellent. So that takes it one step further. Not only did he learn his lesson with Tamar, he put it into practice. He put it into practice with when he saved Binyamin's life as an Arev. That's fantastic. I hadn't seen that. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Any other comments, questions? Jolly good. I will stop the recording now. Hang on a second. There we go.